but otherwise very close. As far as any other interesting things in the main deck, he's a little more removal heavy, going with 2 Putrefy, 2 Mizzium Warriors, a single Decay, a single Dreadbore, 3 Bonfire of the Damned, and you move 2 Tragic Slips in the main deck. A lot of people are cooling on Tragic Slip and preferring Pillar of Flames due to the Voice of Resurgence influx, but Joe, he likes to slip it up.
Yeah, so Joe's addressing the aggro matchups of the deck pretty hard, especially with cards like main deck Nighthawk.
This is certainly a matchup where Tragic Slip is possibly going to be able to pay off, as it's one of the cards that can deal with, like barrels and the like. Joe starts with a tap land, while Ryan gives up his archetype pretty much with Godless Shrine, Doom Traveler on turn 1.
Right, so immediately Joe knows that his opponent is on one of the Aristocrat variations. Junk Aristocrats, which is the one that McKinney is on, probably has one of the better Jund matchups among Aristocrat decks.
Yeah, I think that it's fine. It's better than White Black Red, I think. White Black Red is pretty dismal in game 1 and improves a lot in post-board matchups, I think. But Junk is a more well-rounded matchup. Joe's starting slow with some Buddy lands, but has a Farseek to try and catch back up. It's obviously, the turn 3 Farseek, not really where you want to be.
Yeah, so the turn 3 Farseek, fortunately the Junk Aristocrats doesn't punish you, at least this draw doesn't punish him too hard for not doing anything until for not, really playing a spell until turn 4. Where Joe is going to have, I think, the problem here is the fact that all of Ryan's creatures come back from the graveyard right now. So there isn't, one single card that Joe can play to deal with all of these threats. Aristocrats is really of a critical mass sort of deck that once it gets 3 creatures, it has a couple of pieces that once it gets together, the deck's really strong. And you'll have to remove a lot of things, a lot of things all at the same time, and these creatures are all very hard to deal with.
In my experience, the matchup really just revolves around Olivia. If Joe can stick an Olivia and untap with it, probably one more time, that's going to be the game a lot of the time. Ryan swings in for 3, puts Joe down to 16, and he has a Gavony Township in his hand, which is a fantastic card just in general in the matchup, but he has only a Blood Artist on turn 3.
So yeah, it's just another one of those pieces to the puzzle being put together. I always like watching Aristocrat decks because of how they don't deal damage and yet deal tons of damage at the same time. He played 1/1 for 1 into 2/2 for 2. Certainly not an aggressive curve by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, you play a Blood Artist, and Joe, despite being on 16 life, has got to start being worried that he's, about his own life total because of this Blood Artist.
Yep, Blood Artist is one of the weaker cards in the matchup. Most Junk Aristocrats players are going to wind up siding it out against Jund especially, because, all it really does is make a play like this, Bonfire, punish you slightly.
Right, and I think that's you really touched on the problem there. Because Jund is such a removal-heavy deck, Blood Artist itself isn't a great threat. So because that, Jund doesn't really have to address it very much. It's very easy for Jund to kill the card or otherwise just blank it.
The key for the Aristocrats player is to actually generate threats, and Joe, it looks like, miracled that Bonfire and is following with a Farseek. Ryan, importantly, appears to have missed his Doom Traveler Spirit trigger.
Yeah, so
he got an Elemental token out, but he did not get a Spirit token unless the judge is handling that, which...
That's going to make his Elemental a 1/1 instead of a 2/2. Oh no, okay, Spirit is there. Excellent.
Right. So that would be a big miss. In this matchup, you need literally every creature you can get.
Right. So Ryan right now needs to find a way to reload on threats, which he actually, I think he does. He has Garruk Relentless and Lingering Souls, so he has plenty of creatures. As you said, one of the big things he needs to avoid is Olivia in the matchup. Fortunately, he does have a Tragic Slip in hand for that as well. So it seems like, despite the fact that he got a Miracle Bonfire, something no aggro deck wants to see, I would say Ryan McKinney's still should be pretty happy with his situation right now.
Ryan's draw was one of those draws that's pretty resistant to Bonfire in general. There are draws that can be weak to it from the Aristocrats, but not very many. Most of those draws are like when you start out with just Skurzak, High Priest, Lingering Souls, or something like that, and then Bonfire is just complete wrecking.
Especially Junk Aristocrats that plays cards like Doomed Traveler, Voice of Resurgence, and Young Wolf and Cartel Aristocrat really does a great job against Bonfire.
Yeah. Joe, on 8 life here, has the option between Thragtusk and Olivia, and I feel like he probably has to go for Olivia, and he'll also want to immediately kill a Spirit in order to not turn on Ryan's Tragic Slip during Ryan's turn before combat damage.
Exactly. Joe's got to be aware of just how important the Olivia is in this matchup, so he's going to make plays like out of order sequence, unusual sequencing. Non-intuitive. He's going to make non-intuitive plays just to try to protect the Olivia. And so like you said there, the only answers that he would think that Ryan would have is he has to assume Ryan has a full set of Tragic Slips, but he may also be playing around cards like Orzhov Charm, not Boros Charm, Orzhov Charm, and even possibly well, the Garruk Relentless would be the other one, though that shouldn't kill it.
Right. He's got the mana up to prevent a Garruk from ever killing it. Garruk's a little bit lesser played in the archetype even, although Brad's trying to bring Garruk back as he explained it. But we see that Joe, did go ahead and pass. That is going to leave his Olivia vulnerable to a Tragic Slip unless he simply declines to ping a guy before damage. He'll have to take one more damage, but he'll still be able to eat a spirit, and he'll still get the 2 spirits he needs. It's the sort of play that you don't really notice will catch you until you make the mistake once, and then you're like, oh well, in the future I know to just shoot that guy.
Exactly. So Ryan's just going to go ahead and make a larger army. Probably, he has a lot of creatures in play. He can try to either flood his way through the Olivia. I mean, he knows he has the Tragic Slip in hand, so he's got to feel really confident to continue extending him to the board.
Note that Ryan is also sandbagging his Gavany Township. He wants to make sure that Joe doesn't... Oh, is he doing this in response to the ping? It appears he's saying after. Okay, picks up the guy. So a little unclear on the action there, but now we see him get punished in exactly the way we predicted. Joe taking an extra point of damage, and Ryan getting an extra creature onto the board.
All right, yeah, and now Joe does not have very many answers. He has a Ground Seal and Thragtusk, but it's going to be very difficult for him to life gain his way through what Ryan's doing.
He needs to find another bonfire at this stage. That would be excellent, and he'll need to do it in a hurry because of that Gavany Township.
Yeah, and he's going to go ahead, Ground Seal, try to find it. He draws into, I believe, a Huntmaster.
Yeah.
He just can't. I don't think he can't play these things fast enough to stay alive. Ryan has 8 damage in the air. That's more than Joe's life total.
Yeah, this game will be over as soon as Ryan shows him the Gavany Township on the next turn.
Yep, and there he goes.
All right, well, Joe, there you can see him thinking it through. He's like,
It's one of those plays that you really get punished for, and you realize you know it right when it happens. But it's always hard to see it coming ahead of time. Nonetheless, I'd say Joe's hand was a little weak in that game. He had a turn 3 Farseek into a turn. I think his first real play would have been a turn 4 Thragtusk. He fortunately miracled a bonfire, but as it turned out, that still wasn't even enough to put him into the game.
In hindsight, actually, I'm not convinced that playing the Thragtusk was worse than miracling the bonfire. The way that actually played out, like that elemental token got him real good in conjunction with Lingering Souls, and if he just took 2 from the voice a couple times, might not have been that bad.
Right, I mean, the advantage is that when you know a deck like Junk Aristocrats, all its creatures are X1s or X2s, with the exception of the Voice of Resurgence token and Overrolls, which can regenerate and get very large. So you'd have to think, when in Joe's situation, is, you may want to play that Thragtusk so that you can gain life. If you can get the Voice of Resurgence to trade off somehow, then that Bonfire for 1 will actually probably kill the Voice token. Especially a Bonfire for 2 is a hard sweeper, as long as, even if there's an Elemental and a bunch of 1/1s and 2/2s.
No, I think that, honestly, miracling the bonfire there might have been a little hasty. It's the sort of play where, you see 3 creatures out there, you can kill them all with your bonfire, and obviously, Doom Traveler's going to come back, Voice of Resurgence is going to come back, but you're still got to kill those front ends eventually. That's the thinking. The thing about Voice of Resurgence is, unlike a Doom Traveler, where it's like, the back end, is
you have to deal
roughly
with it.
Equivalent, but it's like only a little bit better. The Voice of Resurgence back end is incredible.
Right. So you are improving their creature by killing it.
It's like a super Strangleroot guy. So I mean, a common thing, Strangleroot guys attacking into like your Augur of Bolus or whatever, you never
don't block
there
because then it will
take your 2.
Right.
And so in this situation, it's very similar to that. It's just deceptive because you kind of you feel like you have to get rid of the voice eventually.
It's hard. So one of the hard parts about playing with Bonfire is that you pretty much have to decide whether you feel like you have to decide whether or not you're casting it immediately. If you hold on to the card without putting it in your hand, everybody knows it's going to be a Bonfire.
Yeah.
So what oftentimes you can do is you actually can flip it and miracle it, and then decide whether or not you want to cast it. It does look bad if you miracle a Bonfire, sit there, and then say, I decline to cast it. Yes, you did show an opponent a card in your hand that probably you don't want them to know you have, but it's better than making the wrong play. And because of how Miracle works, there's not really a good way to avoid doing that.
Sure.
The way you'd avoid it is you'd think in your head at all times, if I draw a Bonfire, am I miracling it? But that's a lot of overhead to be doing while playing a game.
That's true. In the case of Joe's hand, he did get to cast a Farseek as well that turn, so it was kind of a combo play. And if he didn't have a 6th land, I think he probably just has to miracle the Bonfire there because he needs to cast the Farseek.
Right.
I can't remember if he had the 6th land or not. I didn't get a good enough look at his hand, so I think that's also an important thing to add in the decision-making process.
He must have had it because his draw for the turn was Bonfire.
Sure.
Yeah.
Moving to sideboarding, we already talked a little bit about, the Blood Artists are probably coming out. We'll see arrivederci to them. I know I've done some sideboarding with Junk Aristocrats. Brad and I argued about actually the sideboard plan against Jund a number of times. And Ryan is running a bit of a mix between plans that we liked. He has access to the intangible virtues, which are pretty incredible in the matchup in my experience, mostly because they make your spirits invulnerable to Olivia. You get in a lot of extra damage that way. And he also will probably be bringing in Sin Collector and 2 Duress.
Right, so the bigger thing, I think, in the matchup, what you're saying with those cards, is that Joe is an all-removal deck. And like you said, his biggest win con is Olivia, so Intangible Virtue does help to make that less of a threat. With Duress, Ryan can take away a lot of Joe's 2-for-1 plays. You know, Bonfire is oftentimes going to be a 2-for-1, and if Ryan can Duress the Bonfire, then he can turn all these plays into 1-for-1s, and because Brian's creatures are very resilient, that can help him get ahead on card advantage.
The issue with Ryan's sideboard is Brad and I's plan was always to board out basically every creature that doesn't fly or have some kind of evasion. So, you know, we would go ahead and just cut out these Skurzag High Priest and these Blood Artists. I usually keep Skurzag High Priest in on the play, which I should elaborate on. And I like Young Wolf's spectacularly bad in this matchup.
Just because it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, even assuming Joe wastes a removal spell on it, it's still not a good enough creature. Like, it trades with a Wolf token. That's the best thing you got. So you have so many good things to board out, and Ryan actually doesn't have that many to board in. I would probably be looking to bring in like Deathrite Shamans, because at least they have a little bit of reach.
At least they deal damage.
Yeah, and in conjunction with the Gavany Township, they grow bigger. They're not as bad as they seem, but in reality, you know, you're just kind of having to make some lemonade with your lemons.
The fact is, yeah, there's a lot of cards in here. You know, Jund is very good at killing creatures, so to a certain point, you just have to accept that your creatures might die if he draws the right hand.
Yep. And Joe's sideboard includes, he has access to the 3 Pillar of Flames. A lot of people are maining them, Joe's siding them, but he's certainly bringing all of those in. He may also bring in 2 Barter and Bloods, as they're a reasonable solution to Cartel Aristocrat, which can otherwise be really problematic. And he has 2 Liliana the Veils, but I think that because they don't get 2 guys, they're far too weak and far too slow.
Exactly. The sacrifice deck it doesn't seem good enough in the matchup.
Right.
As we see, Joe has brought in the Pillars. We see one in his opening hand.
I think we see 2 with a Huntmaster and lands. That's a pretty good start for Joe. He can, you know, just handle the first couple threats and play Huntmaster. Huntmaster is really obnoxious to deal with if you're a Junk Aristocrats player, as your only real kill for it is Tragic Slip or Garruk. And Tragic Slip is kind of tricky to actually get it to
kill it. Without doing a lot of... Yeah, it's going to gain a lot of card advantage off you, it seems.
Joe drew a Vampire Nighthawk for this turn, and he should probably just play it. You don't really need to pillar that Skurzag High Priest. There's no conceivable line Ryan can really have here other than...
It could be, he could have, you know, Young Wolf Cartel Aristocrat.
Right, but he would have played the Young Wolf on turn 1, so he would have had to draw it in the meantime.
So he'd have had 2 draws to draw that card.
Sure.
You're right, though. It's a low risk.
Because even if you get it wrong, the Nighthawk will just trade with the Demon.
Right, so the punishment isn't that bad.
Right.
You can still pillar the Skurzag High Priest, and you're not, you know...
It's really unlikely that you get punished for the Nighthawk, and if you actually get there, then you get there in a big way. Like, establishing the Nighthawk on turn 3 is pretty huge. Going slow is not really where I think you want to be.
Well, what Joe's decided to do then, he's decided to pillar it, probably because he's just trying to maximize his 1-for-1 removal. I don't think he doesn't see the need to get an early Nighthawk right now. I think he just wants to make sure that all his removal does what it's supposed to do. In this situation, you know, one of his removal spells is, unfortunately for him, going to trade with Duress, which is not where he'd want it to go.
Not where he wants to be, but on the upside, he knows Ryan is not going to follow with an especially potent play. Ryan, for example, you know, can follow with Cartel Aristocrat, but Joe will have a Huntmaster in play. And that's not exactly where Cartel Aristocrat wants to live, because he'll just have to immediately defend itself when Joe passes turn right back.
Yeah, so we see, looks like Abrupt Decay, Cartel Aristocrat, Skurzag High Priest, and Varolz in Ryan's hand.
Not bad. Joe's just going to play that Huntmaster, and Ryan will just have to play a creature and immediately throw one away, I expect, unless Joe draws something pretty spectacular for his turn.
Yeah, what Ryan's going to have to do in this game is he's really going to have to lean on Varolz to do a lot of the work for him. He wants to make sure that guy doesn't die. If he can throw enough counters on it, it can be a pretty potent threat here. But that's because Joe's made a large creature, and you know Joe's made Huntmaster. Ryan's gonna need something large also, and Varolz will be the key to doing that.
Real curious card in Ryan's hand. He has Abrupt Decay. Note that he didn't see a Vampire Nighthawk in game 1, so he doesn't really have a great reason to have brought those in. And they really only kill flipped Huntmaster of the Fells in the matchup.
Interestingly enough, it will do something here.
Yeah,
it will kill the flipped Huntmaster if he wants it to. And Ryan chooses to leave up Abrupt Decay, presumably to Abrupt Decay mana anyway, which is interesting because, like you said, he can't really use it on Joe's turn, I mean, unless he knows that Joe has a Nighthawk.
He duress, so he knows it now.
He knows it now.
But it's not very likely that Joe's even going to play it. Perhaps he plans to use it to kill the Wolf token just to keep the Huntmaster from flipping. But that's honestly... that'll get him a 5/5 Demon probably in the long run, but it also trades his Abrupt Decay away for a Wolf token. So the Vampire Nighthawk can still answer the Demon.
So Joe, in his hand, has a Nighthawk and a Pillar of Flame. He'll presumably flip the Huntmaster and try to use those 2 spells to flip it back.
Right, which is the correct thing to do. Joe's just trying to get max value. Note that, Ryan will actually have to play a little bit carefully, as Joe has a Tragic Slip now, and that means Skrizzak High Priest is not just a free 5/5 Demon. You actually have to go slow.
Right.
Now he is going to Abrupt Decay the Wolf token to prevent a flip.
Right, and that's really interesting that he chooses to prevent the flip as opposed to killing the Huntmaster.
Yeah, and Joe will go ahead and Tragic Slip the High Priest after the Decay resolves. That's a safe line because it plays around Lingering Souls, which otherwise Ryan could just cast Lingering Souls and Joe would have to face a 5/5 Demon. Nothing he could do about it.
Interestingly, Ryan's got to be pretty happy that the Tragic Slip's not in Joe's hand anymore. Remember, Ryan does have a Varol's Scar-shaped in his hand now in play. Tragic Slip's one of Joe's few ways to actually deal with it outright.
It's one of his few ways to actually kill it outright. However,
he doesn't really
the Jund deck doesn't really need to do that. Yeah, it's got Thragtusk, it's got Huntmaster. We can chump that guy up for days.
So eventually, if he wants to get rid of it, he'd have to Tragic Slip it. He could Olivia steal it, which is part of his game plan anyway.
And here, Joe doesn't actually get to decide which of Ryan's creatures he keeps, but he does correctly target the Varolz, as if Ryan decides he wants to keep Varolz, Regenerating will tap it, whereas getting protection from red would not tap Cartel Aristocrat.
So in this deck, Varolz is one of our other sack outlets in addition to Cartel Aristocrat. What it does, that Cartel Aristocrat doesn't do, is it's that first ability it has. It lets you rebuy all your creatures for extra 1/1 counters, and eventually make pretty large threats.
He decides to keep the Varolz. I really don't like that decision, to be honest. It's vulnerable to a number of plays. Most Thragtusk is just, like, in and of itself a real beating against Varolz. He needs to tap his Varolz if we could get the judge on that one, as it has regenerated this turn. It's also vulnerable to Putrefy.
Right, so there's a lot of, Putrefy, Tragic Slip, Olivia, all good answers to Varolz. To be fair, Olivia's an answer to Ryan's whole deck, so he doesn't have to worry about that one as much in making the play.
Takes 2.
Yeah, it seems like Ryan's preparing to make a really large Varolz. I don't think he realizes that it's tapped. Yeah, and Judge is addressing that now.
It was regenerated when you sacked Cartel Aristocrat.
It may change Ryan may have wished that he didn't play that card untapped now.
I imagine it's still correct for his mana. He's gonna, play this Garruk, and now he probably just has to scavenge onto the Wolf token to make it a 4/4 and ward off the Ravager, perhaps.
Exactly.
Which is obviously not ideal, but that's where he is. Previously, playing Garruk, making a Wolf, and scavenging onto Varolz would have been a much better line.
Right, you want your counters on the Regenerator.
Yeah.
Remember, in Ryan McKinney's graveyard, he has a Cartel Aristocrat and a Skurstog High Priest. The other guy's the first High Priest was pillared, so it's not actually in the graveyard.
Correct.
So he only actually has, I believe those are the only 2 creatures in his yard right now, so the Varolz kind of has limited ammo at the time for right now. But correctly, the Wolf is made by Garruk.
And it appears we are going to scavenge. He could do it onto the Varolz anyway and plan to just chump with the Wolf.
Yep.
But that would, if he attacks the Garruk, allow the Garruk to flip. He's going to Tragic Slip the Varolz in response to the creation of the Wolf token.
Okay, so that stops any scavenging from happening.
To be fair, I imagine that means Ryan kind of indicated he was going to go for the Wolf token, because that's what would make this play strictly superior.
Right.
Otherwise, you would not mind removing the creature from the graveyard if the counters were to go to Varolz. Joe is now going to put Ryan to that test.
And yeah, now Ryan has the awkward position where he has to choose whether he wants a Wolf or a Garruk. He's going to choose the Garruk. And Garruk now becomes flipped Garruk with 1 counter.
Joe kind of needed to make that attack in order to make sure this Vampire Nighthawk didn't just die to Garruk's fight. As Ryan now draws, he's obviously going to make a Death Touch Wolf, as very few other plays are even remotely feasible here. There's no creature in his deck that he could search out that's strong enough to really warrant destroying this Garruk.
And one of the hard parts for his deck right now is there's not really a creature in his deck that helps him in this situation. He's going to need a lot. But yeah, it's very hard for him to stabilize on this board.
Right. The sideboard of the Junk Aristocrats deck has begun to incorporate some one-ofs to make these Garruks better. You see that Ryan McKinney has a War Priest Thune, a Sin Collector. He doesn't have a Singleton Blood Baron. That's also become very common for the Mirror. But none of those creatures are effective against Jund, and none of the creatures in the deck are actually like wholesale answers to the Jund deck. You're mostly just trying to grind them. Joe pulls much farther ahead with a second Vampire Nighthawk and Ravager.
Yeah, and a lot of times the Junk Aristocrat, any kind of Aristocrat deck, particularly the Junk one, is nickel and diming your opponent, dealing damage in 2s and 3s, and the fact that these Nighthawks have lifelink actually is going to make it very difficult for Ryan to establish a board that can race.
It's not a deck that's great at pulling back from far behind. It's a deck that's built to like stay on an even keel or slightly behind or slightly ahead until it basically just kills you with some combo finish.
Right.
Blood Artist, Skurzag High Priest, even to a lesser extent Cartel Aristocrat and Garruk. These are all pseudo combo finishes that the deck can pull off. But you have to actually not be getting bludgeoned to death in order to enact any of them successfully. That is an overloaded Mizium Mortars, miracled as it were. For Joe,
right.
Ryan can keep a Cartel Aristocrat and everything else will die. Right, he can give it protection from 2 colors, but that's not super effective.
They'll put it in front of the Ravager. That still deals 6 to Ryan. He has 1 more turn.
He does. And I can't think of any feasible line to really claw him back out, so we'll probably see them going back to sideboards shortly.
Well, interestingly enough, we could have said that about 2 turns ago, that there wasn't really a line for him to get back in it. Just as you said before, the deck doesn't really do a great job of catching up.
It would have involved probably peeling Lingering Souls and Gavany Township, something along those lines, and then just Joe bricking on a couple draw steps. That's about all he could do.
Right.
To effectively counter a Vampire Nighthawk and a Ravager of the Fells.
So in going to Game 3, I think what we saw there was how Jund can be very powerful against this Aristocrats deck. A lot of its removal, especially cards like Mizium Mortars, Bonfire the Damned, and then we saw Tragic Slips, are just very well positioned to deal with the cogs of the Aristocrats deck. Aristocrats needs about 2 to 3 creatures alive to really start doing what the deck's supposed to do. And as long as Joe can keep Ryan on 1 or 2 creatures, then I would say that Ryan's deck's probably just not going to operate how he wants it to.
The key turn of that game, I think I would have played differently from Ryan's seat, is the turn where he played Cartel Aristocrat and Abrupt Decay a Wolf token to keep the Huntmaster from flipping. I think that it's probably more feasible to just like pass turn there.
And then kill the flipped Huntmaster.
Yeah, and then just kill the flipped Huntmaster. You don't get to play a creature that turn. That leaves you, definitely behind on tempo. But you also, you basically just wound up throwing away an Abrupt Decay on a Wolf token, and then you died to a 4/4 Trampler.
Right. Well, I mean, and even if you look at it, I think you're right. First of all, the 4/4 Trampler is actually very hard for Junk Aristocrats to deal with. Joe never even flipped it back, which is something he most certainly could have done if he wanted to.
He purposefully played every spell he drew each turn because he didn't want to wind up in one of those gluts where he has to flip his Huntmaster back.
He just didn't seem. I don't think he ever felt the need to. And now, even if Ryan does make the play the other way, the hard part, especially in this matchup, the way Joe has built his deck and sideboarded, is that Ryan's gonna have a difficult time just dealing with 2 Vampire Nighthawks.
Yeah. The Vampire Nighthawks are huge, and Ryan, though I think his decision to keep in the Abrupt Decays, or I should say bring in the Abrupt Decays in Game 2 was actually, probably not correct. Now that he's seen the proof of the
double Nighthawks,
now he knows.
He's got to keep him in.
It's actually good, yeah. So I think we wound up, broken clocking it, as it were. But we're certainly going to keep them in if we, we're only brought in like 1 or 2 Abrupt Decays. We might even be bringing in the 3rd one now because Nighthawk is a real thorn in the side. That is a tough card to beat.
Yeah, it's funny because it's so good against the Junk deck right now, or like just the Aristocrat deck in general. Aristocrats has so many 2/2s, and just the fact that it's a 2/3 and the fact that it has lifelink are just both very relevant.
When Brad and I discussed how to play this matchup, I'm personally much less comfortable with the Jund matchup. Brad thinks his deck beats everything, so it's a little less useful to have that discussion. But his basic strategy in the matchup was, Game 2 and Game 3, you just combo them however you can, was how he phrased it. Literally, just go for their life total. Anything you can do, just get them. And, that's the approach
you have to hope that they don't kill enough of your things to take away that ability.
You have to hope that you kill the first Olivia, and either they don't have a second one, or you have a second Tragic Slip, because that's what it's going to boil down to almost every time.
Exactly. So you'd be a proponent of running out your best cards first, as opposed to waiting until you can protect them.
Right. Unless I'm running him into a known bad situation, Duress or Sin Collector can give you a heads up as to exactly the order you need to play your cards in. But generally, yeah, like if I'm Ryan, I would have some High Priest in my deck now that I'm on the play, and I would just hope I can 5/5 him on turn 3.
Right. 5/5 actually is outside of the Nighthawks, Joe has a very difficult time dealing with them.
And even if he has the Nighthawks, that actually still puts you ahead as far as the game goes. Like, you're creating the tempo, you have all the initiative.
You made an extra creature.
The burden is on Joe. Yeah. It looks like Ryan mulling over a Buddy Land heavy hand. It looks like 2 Chapels and a Sun Petal Grove.
Yeah, the creatures in it are pretty decent. It looks like he has a Doom Traveler into Cartel Aristocrat possibility. Maybe it's not so bad that he's going to put it back. Yeah, he's going to hang on to the hand.
Yeah, hangs on. I think he has an Intangible Virtue there. Am I wrong? Or is that a Doom Traveler?
I think it's a Doomed Traveler.
It draws a Skurzag High Priest.
All right, so the combo any way you can plan now working out. He does actually have a Swamp in his hand, so it's interesting he couldn't make the Sun Petal Grove come into play on tap, so he chose to skip the Doomed Traveler to go for the turn 3 5/5.
Oh, well, since all he had were Chapels, like he was skipping the Doom Traveler anyway, so he might as well just play the green source on turn 1. Yeah, just good sequencing. And now, if that is a Doom Traveler, in fact, he is threatening a turn 3 5/5, and Joe will have to reply. Dreadbore. Joe's not having it. We saw in game 2 that Joe plays pretty scared around Skurzag High Priest, and it's paying off for him here as he obviously gets to prevent a turn 3 5/5.
Right. So, interestingly enough, in this matchup, and I think this happens in a lot of Jund matchups, I don't feel like when you normally see a 2-mana spell out of Jund, you think it's going to be a Farseek. I'm not even convinced that Joe keeps in all his Farseeks all the time. Like, there doesn't seem to be a really big pressure on him here.
Yeah, in this matchup, you're just trading.
Yeah, you just want to trade, and Farseek doesn't do anything. I'm not convinced that he has to have all 4 of them.
I think that's interesting. I honestly had never thought of it that way. The only real downside I see is you really want to go like turn 3 Huntmaster, turn 5 Olivia, if you can. I think those are very threatening lines. But it's possible that you're not making them often enough to make all 4 Farseeks worth it. Ryan, again, we see, that the barrels, but this Vampire Nighthawk is just single-handedly gumming up all of Ryan's creatures.
Yeah, so Ryan does have 3 creatures alive, which is usually pretty good for the deck. He doesn't have one of the combos yet, though. There's no Blood Artist, there's no High Priest in play. He's going to need to find more. He's going to need a Voice of Resurgence. Something like that to push advantage. Even a Gavany Township would be enough.
See, normally in a situation like this, just facing a creature against Jund, like say that was, a Thragtusk or whatever, it would not be remotely unreasonable for Ryan to just sack his Doom Traveler, give his Cartel protection from whatever, slam in for 2, have a flyer ready to attack with it next turn, scavenge that Doom Traveler onto something, start making something happen. But because it's Vampire Nighthawk, all of those are wrong.
It always trades. And it gains life.
Yeah, it gains, if Ryan decides to start sacking creatures to get through, Joe will just attack him and gain the life back.
Right.
So Joe can just establish the status quo, relying on the Vampire Nighthawk to hold the fort. When Ryan tries to break it, Joe gets to decide which way he wants to try and break it back. The downside is, if Joe's mana screwed here, which he
looks
might
like
be,
he is. Yeah. So,
then,
so Silly Mina suggested he shouldn't play a Farseek.
Yeah.
He could really use one.
The status quo will favor Ryan if Joe cannot afford to develop his mana base.
And Joe is actually going to be the one to initiate the attack. An interesting line here, he is not very worried about the damage-dealing potential of Ryan.
Looks like he was slow rolling the land, just deciding whether he needed to play it tapped or not, and what his play should be. That implies probably like a removal spell versus a creature this turn, or perhaps 2 removal spells versus 1 and a tapped land. Or is he just going to slam an Olivia? I don't like just slamming an Olivia. That seems like...
He has a Huntmaster also available for slamming, which I think is probably... That's a play I like.
I like the Huntmaster here, yeah.
Yeah. Olivia's fine, but it is baiting out the best kill spell right now, as Ryan knows he has to answer Olivia.
If Joe has a second Olivia, it might be reasonable to go ahead and play it. And, to be fair to Joe, we should credit that if this Olivia lives, it's the best. Like,
yes, it is better than...
That's a huge upside that, you have to actually evaluate, is that, a living Olivia is just pseudo-unbeatable this early in the game. So, basically, Joe's taking the play with the most upside here, which is, I play this thing, and if it lives, I probably just get to kill my opponent. If it doesn't, then we're still playing Magic.
Yeah, his backup plan's not too bad here. It's not unreasonable to just do a kill spell check. and I don't think Ryan has the kill spell.
No, I don't think so either. And his demeanor suggests the same. He's thinking like, what do I have to do here? He's going to scavenge onto Barrels. Barrels is a little bigger now, but he still gets shut down by all the same cards. Thragtusk, Huntmaster, they're all bigger and better than him.
Right. So he's using that. He's pushing Joe only down to 19, unfortunately for him. Ryan does have the option to start making 5/5s. He has a High Priest. He has another Cartel Aristocrat. He's going to pick neither.
Ryan, I think I would have preferred to scavenge onto the Aristocrat, to be honest. It's just the more durable of the creatures.
Yeah, Cartel Aristocrat is pretty much just more durable. Yeah, that does seem correct to make that play. And Joe now has a bunch of pretty decent plays available to him.
Yep. His Olivia lived. That was step one.
Yeah, step one achieved.
It does look like he has a Huntmaster, and I see what looks like 2 removal spells. I think one's a slip, and the other one,
he has a Bonfire, a Huntmaster.
Well, Bonfire's not very good right here. It'll just kill a Doom Traveler, which is not what you really want out of your 5-mana spell when you have an Olivia literally in play. That will do the job a lot cheaper.
So, yeah, Joe's going to choose to race here, which is pretty strong. He doesn't, between the Huntmaster in his hand and the Huntmaster and Tragic Slip in his hand, it seems very hard that he would lose the race.
He is going to go ahead and zap Doom Traveler. Ryan will prevent Olivia from growing via Cartel Aristocrat and make a Spirit.
Yeah, it looks like that Joe is going to, he's going to Tragic Slip something here, which is what it looks like. And he used Olivia to ping a creature. We'll see which one he did.
I assume that he pinged the Spirit token that Ryan was making and is now slipping away the Barrels, which will prevent Ryan from scavenging back that Doom Traveler, making any of his creatures any bigger, and continues to just push Joe ahead on the board. And now at this point, even if Ryan draws a kill spell for the Olivia, it's done enough damage.
It doesn't matter. Ryan's board's going to have a really difficult time just beating the Huntmaster that's in Joe's hand, not to mention the Vampire Nighthawk that's already in play.
Yeah, it was already doing a pretty poor job against the Nighthawk. Joe's got spells and lands, and that's really all the Jund deck needs to triumph from this position. The Junk Aristocrats deck is really post-board under so much pressure to combine all of its elements together. It's one of the reasons I don't like the matchup personally from the Junk Aristocrats side, is just because the Jund deck literally just needs
2 kill
7 to 8 spells and the mana to cast them. They don't even necessarily all need to be kill spells depending on their configuration. Yeah, whereas the Junk deck really needs specific cards.
Well, and that's one of the hallmarks of Jund decks, just in general, is that Jund decks always have great cards in them. If they have mana to cast their cards and they cast enough of them, they will probably win because their cards are just better than what their opponent is doing.
Yeah.
They're very efficient and they're very powerful.
Ryan doesn't play his High Priest here. Honestly, he probably needed to, as otherwise the Olivia gets to kill a Cartel Aristocrat, and Skurzak High Priest is just never turning on in this game. It's not a reasonable expectation to make your Squire anything more than. So if you just play it this turn, it gets to guarantee.
Well, I think what Ryan's hoping to do is he's hoping to draw some sort of kill spell for Olivia, and then he wants a way to pull back in the game. And High Priest will do that for him. If he loses the High Priest, he's just left with a pair of Grizzly Bears, and then it doesn't matter whether he kills the Olivia anymore. It's not. You're right that it's not a great. The odds of that working are not very high.
The problem I have with that plan is that you need a Cartel Aristocrat in play in order to Tragic Slip an Olivia, generally speaking. Once Joe wises up or whatever, he just won't need to kill any guys anymore once they're all dead. Like this turn, he can go ahead and just wipe an Aristocrat. He's going to choose to play a Huntmaster instead.
Yeah, I think Joe feels pretty far ahead right now, and he's going to try to push his advantage while he knows that Ryan has no answer.
Yeah.
He's shocking himself so that he has the Olivia activation. He's going for the kill.
There's a Voice of Resurgence. See, the thing. Imagine we had played that Skurzak High Priest. Joe can't just play the Huntmaster there. He actually has to spend some time killing some stuff.
Right.
So it's a slightly less dominant position. Obviously, it doesn't seem to really matter. Like we said, Olivia survived. That's what happens.
Olivia survived, and that's all that matters. And interestingly enough, Joe didn't do too much killing with Olivia either.
No, but
it wasn't,
her influence is so strong.
Her influence is so strong that you don't even need to activate her. Just her presence will tie up a game.
Yeah, the phrase I used when we were describing combo off, like having things like a Doom Traveler just sitting in play, that's a thing you need.
It's really
in this
good.
Deck. Like you have to just have it.